When a youth center director, about to lose his building due to policies favoring Melania Trump's high-profile Be Best initiative, pleaded to Representative Jasmine Crockett, "You are our last hope." Crockett used his exact words in a congressional hearing to challenge the First Lady's support for all children narrative head-on. The moment the words left her mouth, the sterile, wood-paneled hearing room fractured. Within seconds, the clip was being cut and blasted across social media by journalists who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. On C-SPAN, which usually hummed with the quiet drone of bureaucratic proceedings, the phone lines lit up with such intensity that a producer was heard on a hot mic saying, "I've never seen anything like this." Before the committee chairman could even slam his gavel to restore order, #LastHope hearing was the #1 trending topic in the world, a digital wildfire sparked by one man's desperation and one woman's refusal to let it be ignored. Just 3 days earlier, the concept of a viral hashtag was the furthest thing from David Reyes's mind. His world had shrunk to the size of a single, unforgiving piece of paper. It was a letter from the Federal Community Grant Program, and its message was simple: application denied. He sat in his small, cluttered office at the Oak Cliff Youth Collective, the sounds of life outside his door, a painful reminder of what he was about to lose. He could hear the rhythmic thumping of a basketball on the cracked pavement of their small court, the excited shouts of a group of middle schoolers arguing over a video game in the common room, and the quiet hum of a sewing machine from the corner where Maria, a high school senior, was teaching younger girls how to mend their own clothes. This place wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary carved out of a neighborhood the rest of the city often chose to forget. It was a place where you could get a hot meal after school, help with homework, or just a few hours of peace away from the pressures of the world. David had run the center for 15 years on a shoestring budget, patched together with small local grants and the goodwill of neighborhood businesses. This year, for the first time, he had applied for a federal grant. The Youth Engagement Fund seemed tailor-made for them. It was a $50,000 grant. Not a life-changing sum for the federal government, but for the Oak Cliff Youth Collective, it was everything. It was a new boiler to replace the one that clanked and wheezed through the winter. It was 3 new computers so kids didn't have to wait in line to do their school research. It was a year's salary for a part-time social worker. It was, quite simply, survival. The denial letter offered no real explanation, just a cold, clinical reference to a failure to meet evolving programmatic standards for quantifiable impact. Quantifiable impact. David looked out his window at a group of teenagers laughing on the steps. How did you quantify the impact of a kid choosing to finish his homework here instead of joining a gang on the corner? How did you measure the value of a safe place in a dangerous world? He picked up the phone and started making calls. He called the regional grant office in Dallas. A polite but firm administrator told him the decision was final and that they had received an unprecedented number of applications. He called the main office in Washington, D.C. and was bounced around a voicemail labyrinth for 20 minutes before being unceremoniously disconnected. He felt a profound sense of powerlessness, a feeling of being a small, insignificant cog in a machine so vast and indifferent that it didn't even know it was crushing him. The weight of his promise to these kids, to this community, pressed down on him. He had told them everything would be okay. He had told them help was on the way. That evening, defeated, he sat on his couch and flipped on the news. The screen was filled with a polished, gleaming vision of a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away. First Lady Melania Trump was in a suburb of Northern Virginia, cutting a large silk ribbon at the grand opening of the new Be Best Digital Future Academy. The building was a marvel of glass and steel. Inside, smiling children sat at rows of brand new computers, each adorned with the logo of the giant tech corporation that had partnered with the White House on the project. The cameras zoomed in on the First Lady as she approached the podium, her expression serene. "It is in places like this," she said, her voice soft and measured, "that we build the foundation for a better future. We are ensuring every child has a safe and supportive space to thrive." David stared at the screen, a bitter taste rising in his throat. A safe and supportive space. The words echoed in his head, mocking him. He thought of his own center, With its worn-out couches, mismatched chairs, and the constant struggle to keep the lights on, his space was safe. His space was supportive. But it didn't have glass walls or a corporate sponsor. It wasn't a photo opportunity. And so, it didn't count. The news anchor mentioned that the Be Best Academy was partially funded by a new government initiative to promote public-private partnerships, a fund administered by the same federal program that had just denied David's application. It was like a punch to the gut. They hadn't run out of money. They had just decided his kids weren't the right investment. That was the breaking point. The helplessness he'd been feeling all day curdled into a hot, focused point of anger. It wasn't just about his center anymore. It was about the sheer injustice of it all, the polished lies being told on national television while real communities were being starved of resources. He wasn't a political person. He didn't follow the day-to-day drama of Washington. But he knew his congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett. He'd seen her at community meetings. She had a reputation for being a fighter, for not backing down. He had never reached out to a politician before in his life. He felt foolish, like he was shouting into a hurricane. But what other choice did he have? He opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could he possibly say? He decided to just tell the truth. He wrote from the heart, not as an administrator, but as a man watching his life's work crumble. He described the center, the kids, the denial letter, and the cruel irony of watching the First Lady's speech on the same day. He didn't edit it. He didn't try to sound professional. He just let the frustration and fear pour out onto the page. He ended the email with a simple, desperate plea. I know you are busy, Congresswoman, and I'm just a guy running a youth center in your district, but I've tried everything, and I don't know where else to turn. These kids count on us, and we're about to let them down. You are our last hope. He stared at the words for a moment, then clicked send. He closed the laptop and felt a hollow sense of finality, as if he had just dropped his last coin into a wishing well that he knew, deep down, was empty. 200 miles away, in her small D.C. apartment, Jasmine Crockett was doing what she did most nights, catching up on the day. Her desk was a chaotic landscape of briefing binders, legislative drafts, and stacks of constituent correspondence. Her small staff worked tirelessly to sort through the thousands of emails and letters that flooded her office each week, flagging the most urgent ones for her personal attention. It was nearly midnight when her legislative aide, a sharp young woman named Sarah, forwarded an email to her personal inbox with a single subject line, FYI, FCGP denial in Oak Cliff. FCGP. Federal Community Grant Program. Jasmine's mind, trained by years as a public defender and a legislator, instantly began connecting the dots. She remembered a note in a recent appropriations briefing about a shift in funding priorities for that very program, diverting funds towards high-visibility public-private partnerships. She opened the email from David Reyes. She read it once, then read it again, more slowly this time. She recognized the name of the center. She had driven past it 100 times. She knew the neighborhood, knew the struggles, and knew the quiet resilience of the people who lived there. The email was raw, unvarnished, and devastatingly human. It wasn't the usual correspondence filled with political jargon or demands. It was a cry for help. As a public defender, she had heard that same tone in the voices of countless people who felt trapped by a system that was designed to ignore them. And she got to the final sentence. You are our last hope. The words landed with a physical weight. It was the burden and the privilege of her job distilled into 5 words. This wasn't just about a grant anymore. It was about a promise. A promise that when the government spoke of helping children, it meant all children, not just the ones who were useful for a photo op. It was about the yawning gap between the polished rhetoric of the powerful and the harsh reality of the people they were supposed to serve. She looked at her calendar for the next day. She was scheduled to sit on the House Oversight Committee for a routine hearing on federal grant distribution. The witness was the administrator of the agency that had sent David Reyes his denial letter. A plan began to form in her mind. It was risky. It would be seen as a direct attack on the First Lady, a move that would inevitably bring a storm of criticism down upon her. It was a breach of the unwritten rules of Washington decorum. But when she weighed that against the quiet desperation in David Reyes's email, it wasn't a choice at all. She printed the email and the article about Melania Trump's ribbon-cutting ceremony. She placed them carefully in her briefcase. She would not let this go. She would not let David's plea be another unheard voice swallowed by the void. She would take his words to the one place where the people who made these decisions couldn't ignore them. She would take them to the battlefield. She owed it to the man who, in his darkest hour, had placed his faith in her. She owed it to the kids at the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. And she owed it to her own conscience. Sleep could wait. She had work to do. The next morning, the House Oversight Committee hearing room buzzed with the low-grade, caffeinated energy of a midweek proceeding. The topic was ensuring fiscal responsibility and efficiency in federal grant programs. A title so mind-numbingly dull that it guaranteed minimal press coverage. The witness at the long table was Administrator Richard Thompson, a man who had built a 30-year career in Washington by mastering the art of saying nothing of substance in the most authoritative way possible. He was a creature of the bureaucracy, a man who saw the world not in terms of people, but in terms of line items, budget codes, and compliance metrics. He sat confidently, his binder of prepared remarks open before him, ready to field the gentle, predictable questions he expected from the committee members. For the first hour, everything went according to script. Republicans praised the administration's focus on fiscal discipline. Democrats raised mild concerns about funding levels for their home states. The questioning was a slow, meandering river of political theater, each member taking their allotted 5 minutes to make their points for the C-SPAN cameras before yielding the floor. Thompson answered every question with the smooth, evasive politeness of a seasoned diplomat. He spoke of synergies, stakeholder engagement, and optimizing outcomes. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection. Jasmine Crockett sat patiently, listening. She didn't fidget or check her phone. She simply watched Thompson, studying his rhythm, his tells, the way he would adjust his tie before delivering a particularly hollow piece of jargon. Other members of her party had already used their time. The chairman, a stern-faced Republican from Ohio named Mark O'Malley, was about to move on to the next witness. Seeing no further questions for the administrator, he began, but Jasmine leaned forward and pressed the button on her microphone. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the murmuring in the room. "I have a few questions for Administrator Thompson." O'Malley sighed, a barely perceptible gesture of annoyance. "The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. Jasmine nodded, a small, polite smile on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Administrator Thompson, for your testimony today. It has been most illuminating." Thompson offered a thin, self-satisfied smile. "Happy to be of service to the committee, Congresswoman." "Wonderful," Jasmine said, her tone hardening just a fraction. "Then perhaps you can illuminate me further on the Federal Community Grant Program's Youth Engagement Fund. That falls under your purview, does it not?" Thompson's posture stiffened slightly. This was a specific question, not a general one. "It does," he said cautiously. "It's one of our most successful programs." "I'm sure it is," Crockett replied, her eyes locked on his. "I was particularly impressed by one of its recent awardees, the Be Best Digital Future Academy in Virginia. A truly remarkable facility. Do you happen to know the size of the federal grant that was awarded to that project?" Thompson shuffled a few papers, though he knew the number by heart. It had been a White House priority. "That was a significant public-private partnership, Congresswoman. The federal seed grant was for $2 million, to be matched by the private sector." $2 million, Jasmine repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "A significant sum indeed. For a very significant, and I must say, very photogenic project." She paused. "Now, Administrator, I want to ask you about another applicant to that same fund. A small community center in my district, in Dallas. It's called the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. Have you heard of it?" Thompson's face was a blank mask. Congresswoman, we received tens of thousands of applications. I can't be expected to know every one of them by name. Of course not, Jasmine said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Allow me to familiarize you. The Oak Cliff Youth Collective has been serving at-risk children for 15 years. It provides after-school tutoring, meals for kids who might not otherwise get a hot dinner, and, most importantly, a safe place for them to go. It is, by any meaningful definition, a safe and supportive space. Their application was for $50,000, not $2 million, $50,000. And it was denied. Can you tell this committee why? The room had grown quiet. The other members of the committee, who had been checking their phones or chatting with aides, were now looking up, sensing a shift in the current. This was no longer a routine hearing. Thompson cleared his throat. He was on unfamiliar ground now. As I said, Congresswoman, the process is highly competitive. All applications are judged by the same rigorous, objective criteria. I believe the file on that particular application noted a failure to meet certain new programmatic standards for quantifiable impact. Quantifiable impact, Crockett repeated, her voice now cold as steel. Let's talk about quantifiable impact, Administrator. Is keeping a teenager out of the juvenile justice system a quantifiable impact? Is a high school graduation certificate a quantifiable impact? Is one hot meal in a hungry child's stomach a quantifiable impact? Because that is the work that the Oak Cliff Youth Collective does every single day. Or do your programmatic standards only quantify the impact of a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by the First Lady? The chairman's gavel came down, a sharp crack in the tense silence. The gentlewoman will refrain from casting aspersions on the First Lady. Please restrict your questions to the administrator and the program in question. Jasmine didn't even glance at the chairman. Her eyes were still boring into Thompson, who was now visibly sweating under the television lights. My questions are precisely about the program, Mr. Chairman. I am trying to understand the objective criteria that lead to this administration awarding $2 million to a shiny new building with a corporate logo on the wall, while simultaneously cutting off a $50,000 lifeline to a center that has been serving my community for over a decade. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. Administrator Thompson, I have here a news report from yesterday. It quotes the First Lady, Melania Trump, at the opening of the Be Best Academy. She said, and I quote, "We are ensuring every child has a safe and supportive space to thrive." A noble sentiment. I couldn't agree more. She then held up the second piece of paper. And I have here a printout of an email I received late last night. It's from the director of the Oak Cliff Youth Collective, a man named David Reyes. He wrote it after his grant was denied, and after he saw the First Lady's speech on the news. I think his words provide a valuable perspective on the quantifiable impact of your agency's decisions. O'Malley banged the gavel again, harder this time. Congresswoman, you are out of order. This is not the place for theatrics. If you have a question for the witness, ask it. Jasmine Crockett ignored him. She held the email in her hand, and her voice, now filled with a quiet, controlled fury that commanded the attention of everyone in the room and everyone watching at home, began to read. He wrote, she said, her voice resonating with the weight of David Reyes's despair. I know you are busy, Congresswoman, and I'm just a guy running a youth center in your district. But I've tried everything and I don't know where else to turn. These kids count on us, and we're about to let them down. You are our last hope. She lowered the paper and looked directly at the stunned face of Administrator Thompson. Her 5 minutes were long gone, but no one dared to stop her. So, my question for you, Administrator, is this, she said, her voice dropping to an intense, powerful whisper. The First Lady says her mission is to ensure every child has a safe place to thrive. This man, who is actually providing that safe place in my district, says he is about to lose it all, and that I am his last hope. Who should he have written to, sir? Whose job is it to care about the kids who don't make for a good photo op? When there is a gap this large between the words spoken from a White House podium and the reality on the ground in a neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, I want you to tell me, and I want you to tell David Reyes. Who is lying? The room was utterly still. Thompson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked helplessly toward the chairman, whose face was a thundercloud of rage. For a brief, frozen moment, the intricate machinery of Washington politics had ground to a halt, broken by a simple, human question that no one was prepared to answer. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint electronic hum of the recording equipment, capturing a moment of pure, unscripted political combustion. Administrator Thompson, a man whose entire career was built on the foundation of having a prepared answer for everything, stared at Jasmine Crockett with the wide, unblinking eyes of a man who had just seen a ghost. The press table was a study in controlled chaos. Reporters were typing furiously into their laptops, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens, all of them writing the same lead sentence. The committee members, both Republican and Democrat, looked back and forth between Crockett, Thompson, and the chairman, their expressions a mixture of shock, glee, and horror. Chairman O'Malley was the first to break the spell. His face, which had been a thundercloud of rage, darkened to a deep, dangerous crimson. He slammed his gavel down not once, but 3 times, the sharp cracks echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. "Out of order!" he boomed, his voice shaking with fury. "The gentlewoman from Texas is completely and utterly out of order. This is an abuse of this committee's time and a flagrant, partisan attack on the First Lady of the United States. Your time has expired, Congresswoman. Your microphone will be turned off." A small red light on Jasmine's console did, in fact, go dark, but she didn't need it. She remained seated, calm and poised, and projected her voice across the dais. It wasn't a shout, but it was clear, and carried the authority of someone who knew the rules better than the man trying to enforce them. "Mr. Chairman, on a point of personal privilege," she said, her tone formal and precise. "My question was not an attack. It was a request for clarification regarding the execution of federal policy, which is the exact and explicit purpose of the House Oversight Committee." I quoted the First Lady's stated mission only to highlight the apparent contradiction between that mission and the actions of the agency her initiative helps to fund. My question is not to the First Lady. My question is to the administrator, who is paid by the taxpayers to run this program. And my question stands. How does he reconcile his agency's actions with its stated goals? She had turned the tables on him. By framing it as a procedural matter, she had moved the argument from the realm of political decorum to the field of parliamentary rules, a place where she was exceptionally skilled. O'Malley was a political brawler, not a legal scholar. He knew she had him cornered. To deny her question now would look like a cover-up. He was trapped. "This is a sham," he muttered, mostly to himself, before speaking into his own microphone. "The administrator will answer the question, but he will not be forced to entertain hypotheticals or respond to loaded language. Keep your answer concise, Administrator. And Congresswoman," he added, glaring at Jasmine, "you have 1 minute remaining. Make it count." The red light on Jasmine's console blinked back on. All eyes turned to Thompson. He visibly composed himself, straightening his suit jacket and taking a sip of water. The smooth, confident bureaucrat was gone, replaced by a man desperately trying to reassemble his armor. "Of course, Mr. Chairman," Thompson began, his voice strained. The First Lady's initiative provides a guiding framework, a North Star, if you will, for our work in community engagement. However, the specific allocation decisions are made based on a multifaceted scoring matrix. It is a rigorous, data-driven process designed to ensure that taxpayer money is directed to the most effective programs. While the Oak Cliff application was no doubt well-intentioned, it appears that upon review, it did not score as highly on our updated efficacy metrics as other applicants. It was a textbook bureaucratic answer, a word salad of jargon designed to sound impressive while saying nothing. It was the kind of answer that worked 99% of the time in Washington. This was the 1%. "The efficacy metrics," Jasmine repeated, her voice deceptively soft. "I'm so glad you brought those up, Administrator, because I, for one, would be fascinated to see them. Let's talk about that scoring matrix. Since it is such a data-driven process, you must have the scoring sheets for every application. Is that correct?" Thompson hesitated. They are internal review documents, Congresswoman. They are government documents created by a federal agency in the process of distributing taxpayer funds, Jasmine countered instantly. And this is the House Oversight Committee, so they are, by definition, not internal. They are our business. So I will ask again, can you provide this committee, right now, with the scoring sheets for the $2 million grant to the Be Best Digital Future Academy and the $50,000 application from the Oak Cliff Youth Collective? I don't have those documents with me, Thompson stammered. Then I am formally requesting that you submit them to this committee by the end of business today, Jasmine said, pressing her advantage. I want to see the data, Administrator. I want to see the specific line item where a center that has successfully served a community for 15 years failed, while a brand new, untested facility with a corporate sponsor received 40 times the funding. Was there a scoring metric for quality of ribbon-cutting photo opportunity? Was there a bonus point awarded for positive press coverage for the White House? Help me understand the data, sir, because from where I'm sitting, it looks less like a scoring matrix and more like a system designed to reward the powerful and the well-connected at the expense of the vulnerable. Now see here, O'Malley boomed, his gavel cracking down again. You are impugning the integrity of the public servants at this agency without a shred of evidence. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. An elderly congressman from Utah, a deeply conservative Republican named Thad Miller, leaned into his microphone. Miller was known for two things: his unwavering fiscal conservatism and his obsession with government transparency and process. He was no friend to Jasmine Crockett's politics, but he was a fierce defender of the committee's oversight role. Mr. Chairman, Miller said, his voice a gravelly baritone. Mr. Chairman, if I may. O'Malley, seeing a potential ally, eagerly yielded. The gentleman from Utah. Now, I don't agree with the gentlewoman from Texas on much, Miller began, and I find her tone today to be needlessly accusatory. Jasmine met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the criticism. However, Miller continued, turning his attention to O'Malley, her request for the scoring documents is not unreasonable. In fact, it's fundamental to our purpose here. If the administrator is confident that this process was as data-driven and objective as he claims, then he should have no problem providing the documentation to prove it. The purpose of oversight is not to simply accept testimony, it is to verify it. Transparency, Mr. Chairman. It's the only way to maintain the public's trust. The intervention was a masterstroke. It was no longer a Democrat attacking a Republican administration. It was a conservative icon demanding accountability. O'Malley was completely and utterly boxed in. He looked at Thompson, who seemed to shrink in his chair. He looked at Miller, who stared back, resolute. He looked at Crockett, who sat watching, a neutral expression on her face, having already won the battle. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Very well, O'Malley ground out, his voice thick with resentment. Administrator Thompson, you are directed by this committee to provide the full, unredacted scoring matrix and the individual scoring sheets for both the Be Best Digital Future Academy and the Oak Cliff Youth Collective applications. They will be delivered to the committee clerk no later than 5 p.m. tomorrow. He then looked at Crockett. Your time, Congresswoman, has long since expired. Jasmine knew she had only a few seconds before he would cut her off for good. She leaned forward, ignoring the chairman, ignoring the administrator, and looked directly into the lens of the main C-SPAN camera. She spoke not to the people in the room, but to the millions of people watching at home, to the people like David Reyes, who felt voiceless and invisible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she said, her voice ringing with clarity. Let the record show that this committee has demanded the documents that will either prove the fairness of this process or expose it as a system rigged for the wealthy and connected. The families in my district are waiting for the answer. The kids who depend on the Oak Cliff Youth Collective are waiting. And David Reyes, a man who has poured his heart and soul into his community for 15 years, is waiting. They don't want a political fight. They just want the truth, and they deserve nothing less. This hearing is in recess. O'Malley shouted, banging the gavel with such force that its wooden head flew off and skittered across the dais. It was over. The dam had broken. Aides rushed to the sides of the committee members. Reporters were standing up, shouting questions at no one in particular. Administrator Thompson was hurriedly escorted out of a side door by two staffers, his face pale and ashen. The room was a cacophony of noise and motion. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett moved with a deliberate calm. She slowly gathered her papers, placing the printout of David's email carefully on top. She nodded to Congressman Miller, a silent acknowledgement of his unexpected but crucial support. She stood up and slid her chair back into place. She did not rush. She did not look flustered. She had come here to do a job, and the job was done. As she turned to leave the dais, her communications director, Sarah, met her at the steps, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Jasmine," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you just do?" Jasmine walked past the frantic reporters shouting her name, her gaze fixed on the doors at the back of the room. She didn't answer Sarah until they were out in the marbled hallway, the noise of the hearing room fading behind them. "I took a man at his word," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He told me I was his last hope, so I acted like it." The hallway outside the hearing room was a wall of sound and light. Reporters, who had scrambled from their seats, now swarmed them, a frenetic pack, sensing a major story. Phone cameras were held high, creating a sea of small, glowing rectangles. Microphones and recorders were thrust forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, was this a planned attack on the First Lady?" Quote, "What did you hope to accomplish by ambushing the administrator?" Quote, "Have you heard from House leadership? Are you concerned about repercussions? Are you accusing the White House of corruption?" Jasmine kept walking, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She created a small bubble of calm around herself, a skill she had perfected in courthouse hallways, just like this one. Sarah, her communications director, ran interference, batting away the most aggressive questions with a practiced, "The Congresswoman has no further comment at this time." They moved as a single unit, a small island navigating a turbulent sea, until they finally pushed through the doors of a staff-only staircase, and the noise was suddenly cut off, replaced by the sterile echo of their own footsteps on the concrete stairs. Sarah leaned against the cool cinder block wall, taking a deep breath. "Okay," she said, her voice a mix of awe and panic. "I need you to tell me what our plan is, because every network is calling. The DNC is calling. The Speaker's office is calling. And they are not happy. The White House press secretary just put out a statement calling your comments a disgraceful and unfounded partisan stunt. We are officially in the middle of a Category 5 political hurricane." Jasmine stopped on the landing and looked at her young aide. "The plan is simple, Sarah. Wary truth. We wait for the documents that Chairman O'Malley was forced to demand. And we don't back down. Get a statement ready. Keep it short." Congresswoman Crockett believes that oversight is not a partisan issue. She looks forward to reviewing the documents requested by the committee to ensure that federal funds are being distributed fairly and transparently to all communities, not just the politically connected. That's it, nothing more. And what do I tell CNN and the New York Times? They all want you for an exclusive, Sarah pressed. "You tell them I'm focused on my work for the 30th District of Texas," Jasmine said. "The story isn't about me. It's about the people the government is supposed to serve. We're not going on a victory tour. We're going to see this through." By the time they got back to her office in the Rayburn House office building, the hurricane had already made landfall. The two young staffers manning the front desk looked shell-shocked. Both phone lines were lit up, blinking with a frantic, unending rhythm. A senior legislative aide was on his cell in the corner, pacing as he spoke in low, urgent tones to someone from the Democratic leadership. The main office television was tuned to a cable news channel, where a panel of pundits was already dissecting Jasmine's performance. A split screen showed her face, frozen in a look of intense focus, next to a file photo of a smiling Melania Trump. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Crockett's accusation, partisan attack or fight for the forgotten?" The clip was everywhere. It was being replayed on a loop, analyzed from every angle. It was on daytime talk shows and evening news broadcasts. It was shared on Facebook by outraged grandparents and on TikTok by political-minded teenagers who added dramatic music to the moment she read David's letter. The hashtag #LastHopeHearing was not just a trending topic. It had become a global shorthand for a specific kind of frustration. The feeling of being ignored by the people in power. Millions of people who had never heard of the House Oversight Committee or the Federal Community Grant Program were now intimately familiar with the plight of the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. They saw themselves in David Reyes. They saw his desperation as their own. And they saw Jasmine Crockett as the champion they had been waiting for. For the rest of the afternoon, Jasmine and her team were in crisis mode. They drafted the statement. They fielded the angry calls from party leadership, who were furious about the unapproved, high-risk maneuver that had put them all in a difficult position. They calmly logged the dozens of calls from other Democratic members, some offering quiet support, others warning her that she had gone too far. Through it all, Jasmine remained the calm center of the storm, directing her staff with a steady hand, her focus unwavering. It wasn't until nearly 9 o'clock that evening that she finally left the Capitol and took a taxi back to her small, sparsely decorated apartment. The adrenaline that had fueled her for the past 12 hours began to recede, and in its place, a deep, profound exhaustion settled into her bones. She dropped her keys and briefcase on the small entryway table, kicked off her shoes, and stood for a moment in the silence of her living room. The city lights twinkled outside her window, a vast, indifferent galaxy. She had intentionally ignored her personal phone all day, knowing it would be a maelstrom. Now, she picked it up. The screen lit up with a dizzying cascade of notifications. 52 missed calls, 348 text messages, over 1,000 new emails. Her social media apps were just red circles with 99 plus in them. She took a deep breath and began to scroll, the digital tide washing over her. The messages were a torrent of human emotion. There was overwhelming support. An email from a public school teacher in rural Ohio. "I cried watching you today. Thank you for standing up for kids like mine who always get left behind." A direct message on Instagram from a man in California. "My son goes to a community center just like that one. It saved his life. You're a hero." Photos were sent to her of families holding handmade signs. A video showed a bar full of people erupting in cheers as they watched the clip of her on the news. For a moment, her heart swelled with a feeling of connection, a sense that her action had resonated in a way she had never imagined. But for every message of support, there was another one filled with a terrifying, venomous hatred. The anonymity of the internet had unleashed the darkest impulses. Her email inbox was littered with racist slurs, the words designed to cut and dehumanize. Her social media messages were filled with threats, an avalanche of vile promises of violence. One person had sent her address, which they'd found online, with the simple message, "We know where you live," and another had photoshopped her face onto a picture of a lynching victim. There were threats against her family, detailed and grotesque. The words swam before her eyes, each one a small, poisoned dart. She knew this was a part of modern politics, the ugly price of taking a stand, but knowing it didn't make it any less chilling. It didn't stop the cold knot of fear from tightening in her stomach. She tossed the phone onto the couch as if it were burning her hand, and went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, her own hands trembling slightly. It was one thing to face down a politician in a hearing room, protected by rules and decorum. It was another thing entirely to sit alone in your apartment and read a message from a stranger who wanted you dead. The public victory felt distant and abstract. The private cost felt immediate and terrifyingly real. Just then, her phone began to ring again. She glanced at the screen. It was her mother. A wave of relief washed over her. She sank into a chair and answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, Mama. Jasmine Felicia Crockett." Her mother's voice came through the line, warm and strong, but with an undercurrent of tension. "Don't you? Hi, Mama, me. I've been watching the news all day. I think I've seen you stand up to that man 100 times now." Jasmine couldn't help but smile. "And what did you think?" "What did I think?" Her mother, Eleanor, scoffed. "I thought, that's my child. You stood up there like you owned the whole building. You had fire in your eyes, the same fire your father had when he'd argue with the deacon at church. So proud of you, baby. So proud." Tears pricked at the corners of Jasmine's eyes. Her mother's pride was a balm, a shield against the hatred she had just been reading. "Thanks, Mama. That means a lot, but," Eleanor continued, her voice softening, "it also scares me half to death, Jasmine. The things these people are saying about you, the names they're calling you. I saw them on the computer. Horrible, ugly things. Are you safe? Is it worth it? Putting yourself in their line of fire like this?" It was the question she had been asking herself. Is it worth it? The exhaustion, the fear, the tidal wave of vitriol. Was it worth it for one community center in Dallas? She thought about David Reyes. She thought about his raw, desperate email. She pictured the kids on the steps of the youth center, laughing, unaware that a battle was being fought for their tiny patch of the world in the halls of power 200 miles away. "It has to be worth it, Mama," Jasmine said, her voice finding its strength again. "Because if it's not, then what are we even doing? If people like David have no one to turn to, if they have no voice, then the whole thing is broken. I can't fix the whole system, but I can make sure this one man in my district is heard. I have to believe that matters." They talked for another 20 minutes, the conversation shifting to family news and neighborhood gossip, a familiar and comforting rhythm that slowly pushed the ugliness of the day away. After they hung up, Jasmine sat in the quiet darkness of her apartment for a long time. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been put back in its place. It was a known variable now, a calculated risk. She walked back to the couch and picked up her briefcase. She took out the printed email from David Reyes, its edges now slightly crumpled. She smoothed it out on the coffee table and read his words one more time. "You are our last hope." She folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table next to her keys. Yes, she thought, it was worth it. The fight had just begun. The week following the hearing was one of entrenched warfare. The initial shockwave had subsided, leaving behind two distinct and fortified camps. The White House, recovering from its initial surprise, went on the offensive. The press secretary, in her daily briefings, masterfully avoided any mention of the Oak Cliff Youth Collective or the grant process itself. Instead, she and a legion of surrogates on cable news and talk radio focused their attacks squarely on Jasmine Crockett. She was disrespectful, a radical publicity hound, unhinged, and a disgrace to the institution of Congress. The narrative they pushed was simple and relentless. This was not about a community center. It was about an ambitious politician's shameless and premeditated attack on the First Lady, a private citizen who worked tirelessly for the nation's children. On the other side, the progressive ecosystem rallied around Jasmine. She was lionized on podcasts and blogs. Activist groups started fundraising drives in her name. But in the wider media landscape, the story was beginning to lose its sharp moral clarity. It was becoming just another political squabble, another he said, she said story from a divided Washington. The nuance was lost in the noise. The GSA, citing the complex and burdensome nature of the request, had successfully filed for a 2-week extension to produce the documents, a classic bureaucratic maneuver designed to bleed the momentum out of a story until the press and the public lost interest and moved on to the next outrage. The fire Jasmine had started was in danger of being smothered by the very system she had sought to expose. Jasmine and her team felt the shift. The initial flood of supportive calls from colleagues had slowed to a trickle As party leadership urged caution, the story was becoming toxic, and many politicians, even those who secretly agreed with her, were beginning to distance themselves. She was feeling increasingly isolated, an island in the middle of a storm she had created. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning nearly 2 weeks after the hearing, the stalemate was broken by an earthquake that no one saw coming. It didn't come from Washington, D.C., or a cable news studio. It came from Dallas, Texas. The George W. Bush Presidential Center, a respected and studiously nonpartisan institution, released a formal statement on its official website. The statement was ostensibly about the launch of a new statewide literacy initiative, but buried in the third paragraph were the words that changed everything. The statement was written in the calm, dignified voice of former First Lady Laura Bush. It did not mention Jasmine Crockett. It did not mention Melania Trump. It did not mention the House Oversight Committee. It was a masterpiece of subtle, yet devastating, political maneuvering. For decades, the statement read, I have had the privilege of witnessing the incredible work done by community-based organizations across our great state. These local groups, often run on sheer passion and dedication, are the bedrock of our civil society. They are the ones who know the children by name, who understand the unique challenges of their neighborhoods, and who provide the safe, nurturing environments essential for learning and growth. While large-scale, national initiatives are important, we must never lose sight of the heroes on the ground. It is imperative that our government, at every level, ensures that its support systems are transparent, fair, and, most importantly, accessible to these smaller, grassroots organizations that so often have the most profound impact, yet face the steepest climbs. Our investment in them is a direct investment in the future of Texas and of our nation. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. The White House's entire narrative that this was a disrespectful attack on a First Lady crumbled. How could they continue that line of attack when another, deeply respected former First Lady from their own party was now echoing the core of Jasmine's argument? Laura Bush's intervention gave Republicans, independents, and mainstream journalists the political cover they needed to discuss the issue on its merits. The conversation shifted overnight. The question was no longer, was Jasmine Crockett's tone appropriate? It was now, is Laura Bush right? Is the system for funding community centers broken? Conservative columnists who had spent a week attacking Jasmine were now writing thoughtful pieces, praising Mrs. Bush's wisdom, and calling for a review of the federal grant process. The White House was suddenly on the defensive, forced to answer questions not about Jasmine's manners, but about the substance of their policies. The GSA, under immense new pressure, announced that the documents would be delivered to the committee by the end of the week, a full 10 days ahead of their extended deadline. In her office, Jasmine watched the news coverage with a sense of disbelief. Sarah was buzzing with excitement. This is it, Jasmine! This is our moment! I can book you on any show you want. Prime time. Sunday morning. We can go on the offensive. We can bury them. Jasmine listened, a slow smile spreading across her face. But her strategy was different. The fight had been elevated beyond partisan politics. To dive back into the cable news circus now would be to drag it right back down into the mud. No, Sarah, she said, her voice firm. We're not going on any shows. Cancel any interview requests. We're not going to define this victory in a studio in New York. She looked out the window, towards the distant Washington Monument. We're going to define it where it started. Book me a flight to Dallas. And call David Reyes. Tell him I'm coming home. 3 days later, Jasmine stood not behind a podium in a sterile government building, but in the middle of a sun-drenched public park in Oak Cliff. The park was just a block from the youth collective. The grass was patchy, and a chain-link fence surrounded the basketball court. But it was alive with the sounds of the community. A small crowd had gathered, local residents, parents, and a handful of teenagers from the center who were trying to look too cool to be interested, but were watching her every move. The national press was there, their cameras and boom mics a stark contrast to the neighborhood setting. But they were on her turf now. At a simple, lone podium, Jasmine Crockett stood with David Reyes at her side. He looked nervous but resolute, wearing a polo shirt with the youth center's faded logo on it. Jasmine waited for the camera shutters to quiet down before she began to speak. Her voice was calm, devoid of the righteous fury she had displayed in the hearing room. It was the voice of a neighbor talking to neighbors.
"Good morning," she began. "Thank you all for being here. I know the past few weeks have been loud.
There's been a lot of shouting back and forth from Washington, D.C., a lot of noise, and a lot of anger. But I didn't come home to talk about Washington. I came home to talk about Dallas. I came home to talk about Oak Cliff. And I came home to stand with my friend, David Reyes." She turned and gestured to David, who gave a small, shy wave to the crowd. "For 15 years, Jasmine continued, while politicians in Washington were busy arguing, David was busy working. He was creating a place where kids could feel safe. He was helping them with their homework. He was making sure they had a meal to eat. He wasn't looking for headlines or credit. He was just doing the work. This center," she said, pointing down the street, "is not a line item in a federal budget. It is a lifeline for this community." She paused, letting her words sink in. This was never about one grant application. It was never about one politician versus another. It was about a simple, fundamental question. Who do we fight for? In this country, who deserves our attention? Is it only the people with the best lobbyists, the biggest donors, and the fanciest buildings? Or is it the kids on this side of the highway?
Is it the communities whose stories don't make for a glossy brochure, but whose hopes and struggles are just as real, just as important? Her voice grew stronger, filled with a quiet passion that resonated across the park. "I was sent to Washington to be a voice for the people of this district. All of the people. My job is to take the letters, the phone calls, and the late-night emails from people like David and make sure they are heard in the halls of power. That isn't a partisan duty. It is a human one. It is the whole job. It is the only part of the job that truly matters." "The documents from the hearing will be released," she said, looking directly into the cameras now. "And the truth about this grant process will come out. There will be accountability. But I want to be very clear. The real victory won't happen in a committee room in Washington. The real victory happens here. It happens when a neighbor helps a neighbor. It happens when a community refuses to be ignored. It happens every single day in places like the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. Our job, as a government and as a people, is to make sure those places not only survive, but thrive." She finished speaking. The park was quiet for a beat, and then the crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, manufactured applause of a political rally. It was heartfelt and real. The national reporters began shouting questions about Laura Bush, about Melania Trump, about the GSA investigation. Jasmine simply smiled. She shook David's hand, gave his shoulder a firm squeeze, and then turned away from the podium. Instead of walking to a waiting car, she and David began walking together, away from the media scrum and down the block, towards the front steps of the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. The cameras followed them for a moment, but it was clear she would not be answering any more questions. Her statement had been made, not just with her words, but with her actions. The fight wasn't in Washington anymore. She had brought it home. The documents landed like a confession late on a Friday afternoon, when political operatives often release bad news in the hopes it will be buried by the weekend. The GSA delivered 2 file boxes to the House Oversight Committee. But this story was too big to be buried. Within an hour, the key documents had been leaked to the press. And by Saturday morning, they were on the front page of every major newspaper in the country. The paper trail was even more damning than Jasmine had imagined. The scoring sheet for the Be Best Digital Future Academy was a testament to political favoritism. It was filled with glowing subjective praise and awarded perfect scores in vague categories like vision alignment and potential for national impact. It received a massive bonus, officially logged under Strategic Partnership Value, for its direct link to the First Lady's initiative. It was a clear-eyed portrait of a system designed to reward friends. In stark, devastating contrast was the scoring sheet for the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. Where the Academy's sheet was filled with praise, David's was a field of damning, clinical critiques. His 15 years of successful community work were dismissed in a single line: lacks sufficient longitudinal data to verify long-term outcomes. The detailed, heartfelt testimonials from parents and local school principals he had included were marked as anecdotal and given a score of 0. The application was penalized for insufficient detail in forward-looking quantifiable metrics and for its modest fundraising infrastructure. It was a portrait of a system designed to punish the grassroots. The revelation was a national scandal. The narrative wasn't about Jasmine Crockett's tone anymore. It was about blatant, undeniable corruption. Administrator Richard Thompson tendered his resignation within 24 hours of the leak, citing personal reasons. The White House went into a defensive crouch, refusing all comment on the GSA's process. The First Lady's office, through a spokesperson, quietly announced a comprehensive internal review of all charitable partnerships associated with the Be Best initiative. The political victory was absolute and undeniable. 1 month after the hearing, the echoes of that confrontation were still reverberating, not just in the halls of Washington, but on a quiet street in Oak Cliff. The despair that had once settled over the youth collective like a permanent, gray cloud had vanished, replaced by a buzzing, hopeful energy. The first miracle had come from the most unlikely of places. The building's landlord, a local real estate investor named Mr. Henderson, who had sent the final eviction notice, showed up at the center one afternoon. David Reyes saw him pull up and felt a familiar dread, assuming he was there to finalize the eviction. But Henderson, a stern-faced man in his 60s, was holding a copy of the local newspaper, its front page featuring a picture of Jasmine and David at the park press conference. "I saw what you did, Reyes," Henderson said, his voice gruff. "What that congresswoman did for you. For this place." He looked past David, through the open door, at the kids inside. "My wife and I, we came up in a neighborhood just like this one. Had a place just like this that kept me out of trouble. This center. It's good for the community. It's good for business." He then pulled the crumpled eviction notice from his coat pocket and, in a single, decisive motion, tore it in half. "You've got enough to worry about," he said, not quite meeting David's eyes. "I'm giving you a new 1-year lease. Same rent. No increase. You just keep doing what you're doing." David was so stunned he could only stammer out a thank you as Henderson got back in his car and drove away. The second miracle was happening in the office. The national attention from the #LastHope hearing had opened a floodgate of support. David and a few of the older teenagers, including Maria, were tasked with opening the mail. It was a daily ritual now. They weren't opening big, corporate-sized checks. They were opening envelopes containing handwritten letters and personal checks for $10, $20, or $50. A grandmother from Idaho sent $15 and a note that read, "This is for the art supplies. Every child deserves to make something beautiful." A retired construction worker from Pennsylvania sent a check for $100 with the message, "This is to help fix the roof. A safe place should have a solid roof." The money added up. It wasn't millions, but it was more than the federal grant they had been denied. It was real, tangible hope. Last week, a crew had come and replaced the leaky, rattling boiler with a quiet, efficient new one. The gymnasium roof, which had dripped water onto the basketball court for 2 winters, was finally patched and sealed. The kitchen, once reliant on a wheezing, ancient refrigerator, now had a new one, humming away, fully stocked with fresh fruit and milk. The art room, which had been down to its last few boxes of broken crayons, was now bursting with new paints, canvases, sketch pads, and clay. But the most profound change was in the kids themselves. The fight for their center had shown them that they mattered. It had pierced the bubble of indifference that so often surrounded them, proving that their small corner of the world was worthy of a national fight. Maria, the quiet high school senior who taught sewing, had blossomed. She had taken charge of organizing the younger kids. Her natural leadership instincts awakened. She was working with David to design a new, modern logo for the center. She spent her afternoons not just teaching sewing, but talking to the younger girls about current events,
about using their voices, about what it means to be seen. One afternoon, as she and David were sketching out logo ideas, she looked up at him.
"It was really cool seeing you on TV with Congresswoman Crockett," she said.
"You made them listen to us."
David looked at the confident young woman before him and felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with boilers or budgets.
"She made them listen," he corrected gently. "I just opened the door."
In her Dallas district office, Jasmine Crockett was looking at a new photo on her wall. It was taken the day of the press conference in the park. A wide shot of her and David standing with a group of about 15 kids from the center, all of them beaming. Her chief of staff had framed it for her. The vitriolic threats hadn't stopped completely. They were a permanent feature of her life now, but they were now vastly outnumbered by messages of thanks and support. The political victory in Washington was secure. The GSA was undergoing a complete overhaul of its grant process. Chairman O'Malley was facing a primary challenge from a moderate Republican who was running on a platform of transparency and fairness. The win was comprehensive, but it was this photo, this image of the smiling kids, that felt like the real victory. The fight had been costly. It had drained her emotionally and put her and her family at risk. But looking at that photo, she knew, without a shred of doubt, that she would do it all again.
That evening, as the sun set over Dallas, David Reyes stood on the front steps of the Oak Cliff Youth Collective. A group of kids was playing a loud, joyful game of basketball on the newly resurfaced court. The rhythmic thud of a brand new ball echoing in the evening air. The lights inside the center glowed warmly, a beacon of safety and promise. He took a deep breath, the air filled with the smell of freshly cut grass from the park nearby. Everything felt different. Everything felt possible.
His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. A new text message had arrived. He smiled when he saw the name of the sender. A contact he now had saved simply as Jasmine. The message was short. "Heard the new roof is on. Keep up the great work, David. The fight continues." He stood there for a moment, watching the kids play under the setting sun. He thought of the journey of the last month. From the depths of helpless despair to this moment of profound, hard-won hope. He typed back a simple reply. "Thanks to you. We're not going anywhere." He put the phone in his pocket, a new sense of purpose settling over him. He wasn't just the director of a youth center anymore. He was a man who had found his voice, a man who had been reminded that even in the face of overwhelming power, a single plea, amplified by a single act of courage, could change the world. He turned and walked back into the bustling, vibrant center he had almost lost, ready for the work of tomorrow. A single person's plea for help, when amplified by a leader with courage, can spark a national conversation. But what happens after the cameras leave and the headlines fade? What is our collective responsibility to the community centers and local heroes in our own neighborhoods? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories about the people fighting to make a difference, don't forget to subscribe.